Ja, og Kasper. Kasper var en temmelig artig dreng.
About a year ago, ideas started roaming around in my head to write and also illustrate my own children's book. Last summer, I created a deadline for myself to actually make this book for winter, and now it's winter and it's right here. This is of course a mock-up book, so I'm really hoping for it to be published at some point. In this video, I'll tell you about what I learned in the process, and there's quite a lot because this time I both wrote and drew the story. In the end of the video, I'll also share a bit of the tricks that I used when drawing for the book. Some of the tricks are very banal, and in this way I hope to demystify the idea of the artist kind of always knowing how exactly to draw this or that. Let us now dive into talking about the creation of this children's book here. Theme: being introvert. I wanted to write this children's book here to address the theme of being introvert, especially being introvert as a kid. I am myself closer to being introvert on the scale between introvert and extrovert, and I recall as a kid that many of my friends wanted to play after school, but I, on the other hand, really just wanted to kind of play by myself at home. So I found it kind of hard and difficult to deal with when I was a kid, when my friends came over after school and they wanted to play, and I really just had to set the no to them. And how do you set limits for yourself when you are a kid? This was what I wanted to articulate, and here on YouTube, as well as speaking with friends and family, I found out that this was a theme. These were some feelings that many people resonated with. I spent time researching the theme, reading articles about introverts and how introverts cope in society, and I read a bit from books about how the brain works with introverts, and I also asked around friends and family about their thoughts. Writing the book. So writing is rewriting. I can't remember who said this, but I have to admit that this is so true. I believe I made a total of 5 versions of the book, writing and rewriting, each time altering something. It might be a little detail, it might be a larger part that kind of became something else. But consistently I had the idea of this guy called Alfred, who's a kid. He's also a dog, who is at home, and he likes to play by himself, and he has a hard time saying no to his friends when they come over and want to play with him. So he has his mother saying that he's not home. But then there's a conflict in that the mother says to him that it's over, this thing with telling that he is not home, so he kind of have to deal with this himself. This is sort of the key story of the book. I have a friend who is very good with words, and she helped me along with writing this, doing this process. I started out by sending her my first version of the text, and this felt very vulnerable as I hadn't thought the text through yet. There was a lot of loose ends, so to speak, and I didn't quite know at the time what the character would do in the kind of climax of the book. There were many loose ends, so sending it was vulnerable, but it also was very relieving because then I kind of started the process. Like, it couldn't get scarier than that because I'd already came over that scary bump. Now the process was begun. Now I want to share with you especially 2 things that I really learned in this process of writing it. The first one being, show it, don't tell it. Drawing is my primary language, but writing is more difficult to me. This resulted in me often writing long sentences about what a character was feeling or doing. So for instance, we have a sentence as this, when Alfred says, "But what should I say?" asks Alfred, sad that the mother can no longer do it. So here, instead of writing that Alfred is sad, I can show it through body language. That is, I can show it through drawing instead. Other times I had to work more with giving more information in the text actually. In my first version I had little information about Alfred and his playing in his room because I took this for granted that the viewer wouldn't want more information. But my writer buddy told me that she wanted to have more text about his game, as she said, quote, "The reader needs to get a feeling of how fantastic Alfred's playing world is." And this was really an eye-opener to me. Since the story is kind of loosely based on my own experiences in my childhood, I asked my mom what I like to play with during that age, around that age, and she said that I love to play with Ninja Turtles, so it became Ninja Turtles. And this was a lot of fun to me to draw Ninja Turtles in this children's book style way. Anyway, the whole point with showing Alfred's universe here sets the stage for what comes on later on, and thus there's a lot more at stake when suddenly people from the outside begins to interfere or interrupt with Alfred's playing game. Another advice that she had for me, which I really took in, was to kind of see and write the book as a poem. So thinking that cut out any information that is redundant really. Illustration and text is not always one-to-one. As an illustrator, you work with illustrating a text. What do you highlight and what can be left to the viewer's imagination? These are some of the issues that you deal with as an illustrator. Sometimes the relationship between text and image can be one-to-one. For instance, quote, Alfred has just come home from school. He puts on his favorite clothes. So you have the elements in the illustration that support the text. Sometimes the text tells you something that does not need to be illustrated, while sometimes an illustration tells something that is not in the text. An example is here when the mother goes grocery shopping. In the illustration, we don't see any bags she might carry for grocery shopping. We do not see Alfred's reaction or the mother's face. Instead, we see a close cut of the mother's legs walking. Therefore, the reader can put together that she is going away for grocery shopping, leaving the character's facial expressions and body language up to the viewer's imagination. A fun detail here is that one of Alfred's Ninja Turtles here is interacting. He's close to being stepped on, and this kind of frightened expression is also a signal or a kind of foreboding of how Alfred now is being home alone, and now he's kind of on his own to deal with his friends coming over. Another example is here where our character Alfred is feeling that time is standing still. How do you illustrate that feeling of time standing still? In the text bit here, there's nothing mentioned about a bee, but I chose to have it here to illustrate, to kind of show, again, not tell, but to show how Alfred feels. I will mention that somewhere in the process of writing, I started to illustrate. I'm both writing the text and also illustrating, so in this way, it's a kind of luxury because I can then decide what should be drawn in the text and what should be written. It also made it a bit more difficult for me because I had more freedom. So normally I would just have a text for me and then I could kind of pick out and choose. But this way I kind of had to deal with both text and image. Anyway, so I started illustrating, and I think actually I've lost the thumbnails, but this is usually the process how I go about. I start to do some thumbnails. Unfortunately, I can't show you the thumbnails, but let's move on to the drawing part of the book. The design of Alfred. The design of Alfred was very important for me as he carries the story. I spent hours and hours sketching and resketching him, using different media, drawing him from various angles with different proportions, in different postures, drawing him alone and drawing him in environments and with other characters. This is a process where I can't make any shortcuts. At this stage, I can't really tell exactly how he should look like. It's more of a feeling. And the way that I find into that feeling is by drawing and redrawing. And then one day, all of a sudden, there is the character. And you never know when it happens, but it will be certain that it will happen at some point. So let's just see the final design here. Here everything matched what I felt about Alfred. He has his karate pants on, he has his black cowboy hat on. He's wearing these things as I here draw on my own childhood as these two pieces of clothes I used to love to wear when I came home from school. He has the perfect proportions, especially the relationship between length and width of the nose, the ears and the eyes. Here I was helped by this dog toy here in the process, which I use as inspiration. The weird thing about this drawing is that I made it late one night, and I was carelessly watching the telly, and I drew using a bad brush in Photoshop, and I used the mouse pad to draw with. This was the setup when drawing him. But the thing is, I would never have been able to nail his design if I hadn't been through these efforts of sketching him on forehand. A bonus info about Alfred. During the process, I had the idea also of drawing him as a hedgehog or a monkey. I ended up with a dog because often dogs are conceived as social beings who like to hang out together, but having Alfred as a person who is more kind of a person who likes to play alone, I thought that was kind of a fun contrast to work with. Also, drawing him as a dog gave me the ears and the tail to kind of work with, showing how Alfred feels during the story. The most important thing I learned in the illustration process was to scale things up. For instance, take a look at this drawing of Alfred here. Here he is encouraging his mother to say that he's not home. I intended the illustration to be of this scale at first, but look what happens when I scale him up, filling the whole page. Much more interest, the eye can go on a journey on his dogginess character, while there is time for the adult to read aloud the text. The notion of scaling up and putting an illustration and using it for a double spread was something that I used for the rest of the process. This creates a lot of room for the viewer to kind of look more at the image and the text. So there's this relationship between more text bits and then pause for a double spread and little text and then maybe more text. So as a viewer, you're kind of not falling asleep, but kind of all the time you're switching. I did all the drawings with a fine liner, scanned them in my computer, and then I did the coloring in Photoshop. I moved around the elements in InDesign, and this way I slowly build up each spread from start to finish. As I mentioned, I will at one point upload as much of this process that I've recorded, so you can get a feeling of how this process is. Rock rhymes on comfort zone. So on a very concrete level, Alfred's room is his safe zone. I got the idea of illustrating this on a symbolic level by drawing a round rock in Alfred's room. This is the symbol of his safe zone throughout the story. We see it on the cover where Alfred is standing. The outside of the rock is blank, which symbolizes going outside of the safe zone. In the first spread, when he puts on his favorite clothes, he walks into the comfort zone. It surrounds him when he is playing. In the first kind of conflict, the rock is gone. When the friends walk away and he's relieved for a second, we see him jumping happily on his rock. Then the mother goes and confronts him and the rock is gone again. So I use the rock actively as this warm circle where Alfred is safe, and whenever he goes away from this safe zone, there's something at stake. The rock is painted in a warm yellow, trying to increase the notion of something warm and comfortable. I didn't have any thoughts on his blue t-shirt, but come to think of it, I guess it contrasts with the yellow color, but I didn't have any symbolic intentions with it. Here comes the bonus section of some of the little tricks that I've used along in the process. So you can call it whatever floats your boat. As I've already mentioned, I found this dog toy that I used as inspiration for Alfred's character design, and I have it right here so you can see. It's just this little toy here, and as you can tell, it's a dog. And what I fell for is exactly that relationship of the length of the head here and also the relationship of the eyes here. You can totally see that I've been inspired by this to create Alfred. And the thing that's great about having a toy as a physical object or any kind of object when drawing is that you can use it as a reference. So I'm an illustrator and I'm used to draw things from various angles, but sometimes it's just really difficult to get the right proportions, and if you have some kind of foreshortening in your illustration. So for instance, drawing the dog in profile is relatively easy for me to do that just by imagination. I could do that with Alfred, for instance, doing this motion here. But what about a gesture where Alfred is looking down? It's a bit more difficult. So here I basically just took the dog and tilted it like this. And this way I could use this reference for whenever Alfred is looking down, and then use this as a reference. Another difficult gesture was when Alfred is looking towards the viewer, kind of. We have a scene where Alfred is listening at the door, and he has this kind of motion here. Let me see if I can get it straight. So it goes like this. So getting the snout to kind of protrude in the right way, which is some kind of weird foreshortening, was really difficult for me to do just by my imagination. So here I tilted him like this, and then I used that as a reference. I did the same thing with Alfred's hat, because a hat is really difficult to draw, especially when it's a cowboy hat, because it has these intricate shapes. So what I did was I found a little buddy who has this cowboy hat, and let me just show you a spread where I used this actively. We have a spread of Alfred kind of looking down, so kind of like this. And here by comparison you can see how I used the cowboy's hat here in the design to draw it on Alfred too. And as you can tell from the Lego figure here, normally you wouldn't be able to see Alfred's eye, but here I cheated a little bit and drew in Alfred's eye as well, because I wanted to communicate his eye. So these little tricks are very good to use, and also very, very cozy to have them standing on your table when you're drawing little friends. So apart from using toys, you could of course also always use yourself as a model, as a reference. And this is exactly what I did for one of the scenes where Alfred is putting on his karate pants. This is actually the very first spread. And I struggled very much with getting the right feeling of how you put on trousers. So what I did is I took a picture of myself where I put on these trousers, and then I used this as a reference. And the deal was kind of that I then had the gesture, I had the anatomy, which I could let myself be inspired of. But the thing is, I have so long legs in comparison to Alfred. So there was a bit of time adjusting his proportions to my gesture. It took a while, and as you can see here on the drawing, it was all about the angle of the back and also the placing of the feet and his head bending over. That was kind of my design issues. So this was another trick that I used. I have mentioned this before. I also sometimes use my wife to pose for me, but she's not always easy to convince. So sometimes you just gotta use what you have at hand. These were some thoughts about what goes on in my mind when I created this book here. If you're interested in more about the process here, there are some Monday doodles where I draw and sketch and tell a bit about the book and how it all starts. Link here in the corner. Other than that, let me know in the comments at which point of the scale between introvert and extrovert are you. That would be interesting to hear. Thank you for watching, and see you around.